years ago, my neighbors across the street, Mr. and Mrs. Steins, endured a terrible loss. Their son Adam disappeared on Halloween. It was assumed he was kidnapped, as there was a rash of kidnappings in the area at the time. The kidnapper was never found, though neither was Adam. Today's the 30th anniversary of his disappearance. To the Steins, these wounds were still fresh. They refused to decorate their yard, despite all the houses on the street going out of their way to be as festive as possible. They don't give out candy, despite the rest of the houses on the street trying to one-up each other by giving out better loot than their neighbors. The Steins mourn quietly in their dark house, the television being the only light illuminating from their window. Kids are advised by their parents to not knock. I've always felt bad for them. I've lived here for 40 years, and I remember the frantic search and rescue efforts that swept through our town. Even though I was barely 20 years old and living with my unemployed father while working double shifts to pay our mortgage, I did my part and joined the search. It was the least I could do. Like all fruitile searches, it ended after a while. Adam was presumed dead. The Steins grew old, and the amount of neighborhood changed around us. New families moved in, and old ones either died off or moved out. Aside from me and the Steins, I'd say the average age of the homeowners is 35, and they all have lots of kids. A terrible rumor started to spread a couple years ago. I know who started it, an older kid named Chuck Dimopoulos. He told his younger brother and neighborhood friends that Adam's ghost haunts the woods behind our street. He said Mr. Stein killed him and chopped him up into little bits. When I learned about the rumor, I was disgusted. The disrespect was so visual and uncalled for. I prayed the Steins wouldn't hear about it, but I'm sure they must have. It was pervasive. I called Chuck's father and told him what I had heard, and I suspect Chuck got a good beating for it. Still, I'm afraid the damage has already been done. Despite pitying the Steins, I don't express my sympathy by refusing to decorate my house and yard. I love Halloween. I always have. I like seeing parents beaming from the streets while their kids nervously ring doorbells and collect piles of candy. The spirit of the season keeps me feeling young, despite being well past my prime and dealing with high blood pressure. Being an old-timer has its perks sometimes. I have Halloween decorations that no one sells anymore. Ghoulish stuff like hangman's noses. Things that are too politically incorrect for stores to sell. I firmly believe Halloween should be sanitized, but should be scary and unsettling. That said, there needs to be an emotional component too. Not just blood and guts for the sake of blood and guts. There needs to be poignancy. Something that'll stick with you after seeing it. That's why Adam helps me decorate. After Dad died in 1989, I emptied out his safety deposit box. There was an envelope with a note and a Polaroid photograph. All the note said was, I caught him snooping around the cellar. I had to teach him a lesson. The photograph was a fresh cement drawing on the basement wall. In the middle of the night, I went into the cellar and opened the wall. Adam's body was inside. My instinct reaction was to call the police, but I was terrified I'd be arrested. They never believed the note. So I sealed the wall. After a while, I stopped thinking about the dead boy in the bowels of my house. Many years later, after talking with Mrs. Stein about Adam on Halloween afternoon, I knew what I had to do. I took his remains out of the wall in 2014. He was only a skeleton. I separated the bones, splashed them with fake blood, and incorporated them into my Halloween decorations. At first, I was worried. As many days went by, though, I realized I didn't need to be so concerned. The bones blended in with the rest of my decorations, just more festive material in a neighborhood chock full of it. This morning, I went out to get the paper. Mr. Stein was doing the same. We met in the street and chatted for a while. We talked about the Cowboys game from last night, and he mentioned his wife made a spectacular coffee cake, that he'd bring me a piece later. I smiled and told him that would be really nice. Before we parted ways, Mr. Stein said, I never told you how much Shannon and I appreciated all the help you guys gave us back when we lost Adam. We knew how busy you were. It's been 30 years today. 30 years. I felt guilt and sadness wash over me. I'm sure he's in a better place, I told him. He nodded, and I saw the tears in his eyes. He was a good boy. I know, wherever he is, he's watching over us. We hugged briefly, then went back to our respective homes. I walked up the driveway, past the ghosts dangling from my trees by their noses. It held up my front steps. I looked at the skull hanging above my doorway. It was pointing at the Steins' house, watching.